Chapter 2 of Operation Terror by Murray Leinster, read by Mark Nelson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Operation Terror, Chapter 2. The car was ordinary enough. It was one of those scaled-down vehicles which burn less fuel and offer less comfort than the so-called standard models. For fuel economy, too, its speed had been lowered, but Lockley sent it up the brand-new highway as fast as it would go. Now the highway followed a broad valley with a meadow-like floor. Now it seemed to pick its way between cliffs, and on occasion it ran over a concrete bridge spanning some swiftly flowing stream. At least once it went through a cut which might as well have been a tunnel, and the crackling noise of its motor echoed back from stony walls on either side. He did not see another vehicle for a long way. Deer he saw twice. Over and over again coveys of small birds rocketed up from beside the road and dived to cover after he had passed. Once he saw movement out of the corner of his eye and looked automatically to see what it was, but saw nothing, which meant that it was probably a mountain lion, blending perfectly with its background as it watched the car. At the end of 5 miles he saw a motor truck, empty, trundling away from Boulder Lake and the construction camp toward the outer world. The two vehicles passed, combining to make a momentary roaring noise at their nearest. The truck was not in a hurry. It simply lumbered along with loose objects in its cargo space rattling and bumping loudly. Its driver and his helper plainly knew nothing of untoward events behind them. They'd probably stopped somewhere to have a leisurely morning snack, with the truck waiting for them at the roadside. Lockley went on 10 miles more. He begrudged the distances added by curves in the road. He tended to fume when his underpowered car noticeably slowed up on grades, and especially the long ones. He saw a bear halfway up a hillside pause in its exploitation of a berry patch to watch the car go by below it. He saw more deer. Once a smaller animal, probably a coyote, dived into a patch of brushwood and stayed hidden as long as the car remained in sight. More miles of empty highway, and then a long, straight stretch of road, and he suddenly saw vehicles coming around the curve at the end of it. They were not in line, single lane, as traffic usually is on a curve. Both lanes were filled. The road was blocked by motor-driven traffic heading away from the lake, and not at a steady pace, but in headlong flight. It roared on toward Lockley, big trucks and little ones, passenger cars in between them, a few motorcyclists catching up from the rear by riding on the road's shoulders. They were closely packed, as if by some freak the lead had been taken by great trucks incapable of the road speed of those behind them, yet with the frantic rearmost cars unable to pass. There was a humming and roaring of motors that filled the air. They plunged toward Lockley's miniature roadster. Truck horns blared. Lockley got off the highway and onto the right-hand shoulder. He stopped. The crowded mass of rushing vehicles roared up to him and went past. They were more remarkable than he'd believed. They were dirt-mover trucks. There were truck and trailer combinations. There are sedans and dump trucks, and even a convertible or two, and then more trucks, even tank trucks, and more sedans and half-tonners, a complete and motley collection of every kind of gasoline-driven vehicle that could be driven on a highway and used on a construction project. And every one was crowded with men. Trailer trucks had their body doors open, and they were packed with the workmen of the construction camp near Boulder Lake. The sedans were jammed with passengers. Dirt-mover trucks had men holding fast to handholds, and there were men in the backs of the dump trucks. The racing traffic filled the highway from edge to edge. It rushed past, giving off a deafening roar and clouds of gasoline fumes. They were gone, the solid mass of them at any rate. But now there came older cars, no less crowded, and then more spacious cars, not crowded so much and less frantically pushing at those ahead. But even these cars passed each other recklessly. There seemed to be an instant hysterical fear of being last. One car swung off to its left. There were 5 men in it. It braked and stopped on the shoulder close to Lockley's car. The driver shouted above the din of passing motors, "You don't want to go up there. Everybody's ordered out. Everybody get away from Boulder Lake. When you get the chance, turn around and get the hell away." He watched for a chance to get back on the road, having delivered his warning. Lockley got out of his car and went over. "You're talking about the thing that came down from the sky," he said grimly. "There was a girl up at the camp, Jill Holmes, writing a piece about building the national park, getting information about the job. Did anybody get her away?" The man who'd warned him continued to watch for a reasonable gap in the flood of racing cars. They weren't crowded now as they had been, but it was still impossible to start in low and get back in the stream of vehicles without an almost certain crash. Then he turned his head back, staring at Lockley. "Hell! Somebody told me to check on her. I was routing men out and loading 'em on whatever came by. I forgot." A man in the back of the sedan said, "She hadn't left when we did. I saw her, but I thought she had a ride all set." The man at the wheel said furiously, "She hasn't passed us, unless she's in one of these." Lockley set his teeth. He watched each oncoming car intently. A girl among these fugitives would have been put with the driver in the cab of a truck, and he'd have seen a woman in any of the private cars. "If I don't see her go by," he said grimly, "I'll go up to the camp and see if she's still there." The man in the driver's seat looked relieved. "If she's left behind, it's her fault. If you hunt for her, make it fast, and be plenty careful. Keep to the camp, and stay away from the lake. There was a hell of an explosion over there this morning. 3 men went to see what had happened. They didn't come back. 2 more went after 'em, and something hit them on the way. They smelled something worse than skunk. Then they were paralyzed, like they had hold of a high-tension line. They saw crazy colors and heard crazy sounds, and they couldn't move a finger. Their car ditched. In a while they came out of it, and they came back, fast. They just got back when we got shortwave orders for everybody to clear out. If you look for that girl, be careful. If she's still there, you get her out quick." Then he said sharply, "Here's a chance for us to get going. Move out of the way." There was a gap in the now diminishing spate of cars. The driver of the stopped car drove furiously onto the highway. He shifted gears and accelerated at the top of his car's power. Another car behind him braked and barely avoided a crash while blowing its horn furiously. Then the traffic went on, but it was lessening now. It was mostly private cars, owned by the workmen. Suddenly there were no cars coming down the long, straight stretch of road. Lockley got back on the highway and resumed his rush toward the spot the others fled from. He heard behind him the diminishing rumble and roar of the fugitive motors. He jammed his own accelerator down to the floor and plunged on. There'd been an explosion by the lake, the man who'd warned him said. That checked. 3 men went to see what had happened. That was reasonable. They didn't come back. Considering what Vale had reported, it was almost inevitable. Then 2 other men went to find out what happened to the first 3. That was news. A smell that was worse than skunk. Paralysis in a moving car, which ditched. Remaining paralyzed while seeing crazy colors and hearing crazy sounds. Lockley could not even guess at an explanation, but the men had remained paralyzed for some time, and then the sensations lifted. They had fled back to the construction camp, evidently fearing that the paralysis might return. Their narrative must have been hair-raising, because when orders had come for the evacuation of the camp, they had been obeyed with a promptitude suggesting panic. But apparently nothing else had happened. The first 3 men were still missing, or at least there had been no mention of their return. They'd either been killed or taken captive, judging by Vale's account and obvious experience.